it gives me really a lot of personal satisfaction to have come and talk to us. Professor Ardell is, as you notice, my only foreign speaker at this conference. And Joy and I have worked back and forth. She's one of those people that you can write an email to, and you can propose a study, and the next thing you know, she's writing back saying, yeah, I'd like to help. And I like working with people who like to do collaborative ventures back and forth. Dr. Ardell is a PhD. She runs the GI Peptide Lab at the Royal Infirmary in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and has been a consultant with ISI and has come over for many of the meetings between Dr. O'Dorisio and Vinnick and Go and myself and the folks at ISI, and trying to develop new prognostic markers for neuroendocrine tumors. And so it's with great pleasure I introduce you our only foreign speaker and a really nice lady, Joy Ardell. Thank you. That's backwards. Speak in the little American microphone.
I'm delighted to be here this morning, and I'm really privileged to be invited. I hadn't realized I was the only foreign speaker, so I hope you can understand me. I bring greetings from Belfast, which is Ireland, and also the UK. The first time I spoke at a patient meeting was about 5 or 6 years ago at CNET's meeting, and I was asked to speak about prognosis, and I thought, you cannot speak to patients about prognosis. I can't do this, and we don't do this at home. We speak to individuals, but not groups together. But you guys are great. You like to know everything about your tumours, and we had the first national patient meeting in Belfast for neuroendocrine tumours just 2 years ago this month. I'll go on, and well, I can see down here. So I'm going to talk about a section of the neuroendocrine tumours, and those are the ones in the midgut, and we've already heard a lot about them today. So it's in the ileum, the jejunum and the ileum, the colon, the cecum, and a very few of the ones from the appendix that go on to be malignant because they've started off as really quite big tumours, and that's quite rare. Right, so the presentation of midgut might be because of small bowel obstruction, and that's not because the tumour in there is very large, it's because the tumour secretes some peptides, and those peptides cause fibrosis, and the fibrosis causes a tangling and obstruction. So they can be tiny tumours about the size of a frozen pea. Now, I don't think we have frozen peas in America, but we have them in Ireland. They can present much later on because of malignancy and maybe a palpable tumour in the abdomen, or they can present as syndrome, and that would be less than half of the patients, and we've heard about this already. And if it's because of syndrome, then that syndrome is caused by the peptides and the amines that are in the circulation. So we're thinking of serotonin and the tachykines and some other things as well. So why do we need to measure something in the blood? Why do we need these biomarkers when we've got so very good other methods of looking for tumors? Well, they help with diagnosis, and they monitor for recurrence, and they assess prognosis, which I'm really interested in, and they assess changing prognosis. So we're going to start off by looking at the diagnosis and the monitoring of the disease as it develops. Now, why don't we just use scans and radiology? That's very good. But scans sometimes use radiation, and that's not too healthy if they're being done every 6 months or every 3 months, so we can't use scans so frequently. And also scans are really expensive. There's another little problem with scans, that the tumour has to be a certain size. It has to be about 1.5 centimetres. Now, I've been working in this area for 42 years, so it used to have to be about 10 or 15 centimetres before the scans could see it, but now we've got down to about 1.5 centimetres. But you don't want to have 15 little tumours of less than 1.5 centimetres and not know about them. Also, we've got the pathology, but we must remember the pathology is very important, but we've probably only got one sample, one point in time, no changing process. We maybe go in and do a biopsy after a few years, but it's really one point in time, and things do change. Now in the lab it's really easy because we take a blood sample. We can take a blood sample from you before surgery in the morning and after surgery in the afternoon. It's not a big deal, it's just a couple of mils, a few drops really. And it's quite cheap in comparison to other things as well. So we can measure those markers very frequently, and through treatment we can measure them maybe on a weekly basis in some patients. And we know also that in a publication from Scandinavia recently, they showed that chromogranin A is the first indication of recurrence after radical surgery. So before the scans are showing anything, the chromogranin A is going up. And chromogranin A is not the best thing we have. So what biomarkers are for the midguts? What is around there? There's chromogranin A, which is the general marker, and there's pancreastatin, which is the little bit of chromogranin A that gets processed and bitten off by the tumours and sent into the bloodstream. Usually only, and absolutely only, when there's disease in the liver. There's serotonin and the product of serotonin, which is 5-HIAA. And both of those have, up until very recently, been a little bit problematic to measure in the bloodstream. So we tend to measure them in the urine in many centres. And then we've got the tachykinins. So we have a clutch of things that we can use to help monitor disease. Now let's have a look at the chromogranin A. And this was actually pancreastatin, because I've come to a really informed audience here. And this was pancreastatin. And we see that if we start from the left, if there are no metastases, it's below that dotted line, which indicates it's in the normal range. If there's local lymph node metastases or even distant lymph nodes, it's not getting outside the normal range. There has to be disease in the liver. If we go on and have a look at chromogranin A, we've heard this morning already that it's up for lots of reasons, and lots of people take PPIs. They can be bought over the counter in the UK, and I'm sure they can be bought over the counter here, omeprazole. And so we find that if people are on long-term omeprazole, then in fact their chromogranin A can be quite high. We have 10 patients here on the left, it's quite high. And off omeprazole for several weeks, it drops again. So that's very confusing if we're looking for a tumour or looking for recurrence. We think about urinary 5-HIA, and again we find that there have to be liver metastases before the urinary 5-HIA is outside the normal range. So it's not a lot of help if we're looking for little amounts of disease. But in Belfast we did a lot of work back in the late 90s, from 99 through to about 2003. And we found that we'd been measuring neurokinin A right back to about 85, and we found that in fact neurokinin A was the best indicator of low-level disease. And even when there are local mets, it's beginning to just get outside the normal range. Distant mets, yes, definitely. So when there's metastases at all, the neurokinin A is going to be raised. Now, my title was how to measure these things and validation of assays. And I think, really, for me as a scientist, to tell you how we measure them is quite boring. We have people in the lab who have been doing this. I've been doing this for 42 years, measuring these things. And I think it's exciting, but I know you won't. So we use two things. I've been trying to convince people for 42 years. It's exciting. If you think of an ounce of salt, that's a very tiny teaspoonful of salt. And you think there's 28 grams in an ounce. There's 1,000 milligrams in a gram, and so it goes on. So we can measure right down to that 1 picogram level. That is 10 to the minus 12 or 10 to the minus 15 of a gram. You're not going to see it, you're not going to smell it, you're not going to know about it, but we can measure it. And the interesting thing is we don't get it mixed up with other things that are quite alike. Now there's two tachykinins and they're very alike, substance P and neurokinin A. And we can tell the difference between those at that level. So it's a bit like you flood a lot here in New Orleans, we rain a lot in Belfast, and it's like me being able to measure one raindrop, know it's different to all the rest, and measure it exactly. So it's a little bit like that. The method that was developed for this is radioimmunoassay, and the people who developed it were two Americans, and they got a Nobel Prize for it, and that was more than 50 years ago. It's improved a bit, but we're still basically using the same technique. So we did an audit in Belfast of looking at 1,000 consecutive neurokinin A's that were outside the normal range to see how good we are at measuring these things. And we found that out of 1,000, some were really high, above 100, and our normal range is 0 to 20. Now, every single assay will be slightly different because we do not have standardization for these unusual assays. So the one in ICI measures slightly different numbers to we measure, but it measures the same thing. And we found that, in fact, mid-gut carcinoids accounted for the majority of the high ones, but less of the lower ones. And in fact, over the years, we've had 2 different assays in Belfast. We ran out of antibody, which is how we measure precisely, and we had to make a new antibody. And the second antibody measured slightly higher levels, because it's very confusing for clinicians if we're going to change our normal range. And because we wanted to be able to say when people were recurring with disease, then we kept the levels the same. So we say that anything below 30 is sort of suspect, but anything above that is almost certainly a neuroendocrine tumor. There's a few other reasons. So if your kidney is not clearing things and you've got renal failure, then that's going to make neurokinin A rise. And also if you've got a tumor of the pancreas that is producing a group of other peptides, maybe it's a gastronoma producing 3 or 4 other peptides and amines as well, then it might be in there too. So we had a few patients that were under study, and I think they'll fall into the mid-gut group, and we have a few patients that have been excluded at present. And we had a few patients that on a second or third sampling, it was normal. So they were excluded entirely. And then there were a few that didn't have follow-up, which is rather sad. That maybe they have died, and we couldn't follow up these patients because they didn't come from our trust. So if we look at the numbers of individuals, then out of the group of 1,000 specimens, there were 304 individuals. 124 were from definitely mid-gut carcinoid patients that had had pathology. There was renal failure in 4 patients, so they had high neurokinases. There were other nets, mostly of the pancreas producing multi-hormones in 32. Patients presented and presently under investigation 5, and they'll probably go into the group above. And then patients that are excluded at the moment, but I think in the lab we need to keep an eye on these patients. There's 6 of those. 87 on follow-up turned out not to have mid-gut, we think, at the moment, and we'd be pretty sure about that. And then 46 that were not followed up, which is quite bad because that's a significant percentage. Now we have a look at the difference between labs, and we have worked together with ISI, Interscience Institute, to validate their assay and to see that it's comparative to the assay in Belfast. And it is. The 2 values that we have are slightly different. We give lower values, they give higher values. The method is a little bit different, but in fact, the 2 assays are very good for diagnosing and prognosing the same thing. Just don't get too confused when I say greater than 20 or greater than 50, because it might be different here in America, and look what it says on the piece of paper you get for the normal range. So I want to go on to talk now not about the diagnosis, which is very important, and they're looking for recurrence, which is very important. I want to go on to talk about prognosis, because that's the bit that I feel has become very exciting over the last lot of years. So patients present and they have an Octrio scan, and that shows tumor. Back in the 1990s, which I consider to be the dark ages, we had a theory, and you waited and watched. Everybody said these tumors are really quite indolent, you don't have to fuss. Treating in a year or 2 will be fine. But for some patients in 6 months, things were not fine. And we need to know that the day the patient comes to the clinic the first time, not 6 months later and you think, oh dear, it's rather too late to be doing anything. So we sought prognostic indicators. And we found that neurokinin A was an independent prognostic indicator for mid-gut carcinoma. We looked at 150 patients retrospectively, going back over old data. And we published that. We found that if the neurokinin A was greater than 50 at presentation, the line was the dotted one on the left, and that was indicating that prognosis was poor, survival was poor. In fact, 50% survival was about a year. And we found that in patients that presented with neurokinin A's less than 50, then survival was much better. And this is looking back in the time. We didn't have so many treatments, and we didn't have so many options, and we did watch and wait. So we found that 3-year survival in the patients with the high neurokinases, or the red box, really poor, and the ones that had the lower neurokinases, the prognosis was much better. The most exciting thing about the work that we did was that the most recent neurokinin gave the most accurate prognostic indication, making the initial one of no longer any value. So if we could lower the neurokinin, perhaps we could change the prognosis. So we know that we can lower the neurokinin if we give somatostatin analogues, long-acting somatostatin analogues in these 20 patients. We lower the neurokinin really significantly in patients with tumours in the mid-gut. And some patients don't respond so well. And it's often a first-line treatment. We'll have surgery. The patient will have surgery. They'll take out what they can. Some patients, it's inoperable from square one, especially 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago. The surgeons would decide it was inoperable because the tumour was in the liver around the major vessels. So we would think somatostatin analogues right up front on that day the patient gets. So some creep out of control within a few months, 9 to 12 months. And we think of other things. So we are really enthusiastic about alpha interferon. I heard somebody else this morning saying very mixed opinion. And we've used it a lot from the year 2002, so 10 years experience. We find a third of patients say, I feel unwell on this. I feel like I've got flu, I've got a headache, I don't want to take it. Fair enough. In a third of patients, they don't seem to respond, but in a third of patients, it's excellent. And this is a lady who presented in 2002, and she was the first lady that we tried alpha interferon along with somatostatin analogues, inoperable mid-gut carcinoid, extremely advanced. Her neurokinin was so high that her prognosis was definitely under 2 years, but probably 6 months. She didn't respond to the somatostatin analogues, which are those yellow arrows, increasing doses. And we actually moved her up into doses that we got permission to give her. And then we brought in alpha interferon, and you can see her neurokinin A, her chromogranin A, her pancreastatin, and her urinary 5-HIAA just fell beautifully over a 6-month period. That lady unfortunately died last year, but she had 8 good years on that treatment, and her prognosis was probably 6 months. So there's lots of things we can do to change the markers and follow the patients and know how well they are responding. So we've got surgery, and surgery is the only chance of cure, but in mid-gut carcinoid it's not usually cure. And that's not because I'm not a surgeon, it's really the truth. So there's somatostatin analogues, and that's the maintenance treatment. We use alpha interferon a lot, and then there's lots of things that we can target the liver with. All sorts of embolizations, ablations, microwave surgery, nanoknife. And then there's peptide receptor radiation therapy, which is yttrium-90, the magic bullet that we've had in the UK for about 12 years now and has come recently to the States. It wasn't as magic as we hoped it would be, and especially because the initial patients were always the patients that had a very poor prognosis, and it was a sort of a last attempt. But now we're starting to use patients with much less disease, and it's really quite successful. So there's MIBG in there, yttrium-90 and lutetium-177. And then we've got this sort of very good double whammy, which is really like embolization, little spheres that will cut off the vessels that are being the blood supply to the tumours in the liver, and as well as that irradiate. So that's sort of doing two things at once, and they're very exciting and they're quite successful. Chemotherapy isn't usually the way forward for these tumours because we know that the proliferative index in the Ki-67 is quite low, and the turnover of the cell is therefore not suitable. But we have a few other drugs coming up at the moment, like everolimus and the tyrosine kinase inhibitors and the COX-2 inhibitors, and some of these are being tried out in trials at the moment. So there's lots of options. We did another audit, and that was looking at patients that presented with neurokinin A over 50, and I'll need to go through this quickly. So they had a histological diagnosis of a mid-gut carcinoid, and they had to survive for more than 2 months, so they weren't just terminal when we got the first sample. We looked at the patients' notes. We found out all about 97 patients in the period that we looked at from Northern Ireland. And there was no diagnosis in 2, and 10 of them didn't survive the time. So we had 85 patients that went forward. Now we found that in the patients that the neurokinin A was not dropped below 50 at any stage, their prognosis was the left-hand side, which was not good. For the patients that we could change the neurokinin A and drop it below 50, then prognosis changed dramatically. So that was what we thought from the first study, and that was what we realize now. So the midline survival, the average 50% survival for these patients had greatly improved. When we look back on the old study, and we look back on the new study, we find that in the new study, lots of patients are still alive. So when we compare these two survivals, then the one on the right-hand side is going to spread out as time goes on. But we find there was a significant difference in the past to the present. But one thing that was really interesting was that in the 29 patients that presented in the earlier study with neurokinin of this range, only 7 we could drop their neurokinin A, or did. Maybe we could have done better. And on the more recent study, 60% we can drop the neurokinin A, and we're battling towards improving with this all the time. So, in fact, we are able to move 60% of the patients from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of that curve now in recent times. And I've just updated the data, so the orange boxes are the old, is the old study and the survival over 5 years, the median survival. The green lines are the survival that is going on and continuing really well in these patients in the new study. And the little black ones are the ones that didn't get referred to our group in Belfast and stayed with the local hospital. And so neurokinin A is a specific marker for midgut carcinoid, and it's an excellent use in the laboratory and it's of a lot of clinical use. Raising neurokinin A is a sensitive indicator of poor prognosis, and lowering that neurokinin A can change prognosis. There's lots of ways of doing that, and we're improving prognosis all the time by doing this in Belfast. So that's a team effort always. The people in the lab, who are the lab rats, I'm known as the lab rat, and people in the clinic, and I get over there as well, so I can clean up and go over there. And that's what I have to say about neurokinin A.